Well, good morning, everybody. I have to speak English or use English in order to present our participant in the first participant in this journey. Okay. Well, before starting the presentation, I am here on behalf of the Universitat Politécnica de Valencia and on behalf of the School of Informatics. I am very grateful with Luke to come here to present the project or the Arachne risk scoring tool, and also I want to express the gratitude of the university and the school with him to make the effort for coming here to presenting the Arachne tool. Well, I'm not going to present or to give a short description because he is going to present, but the title of his talk is Arachne Risk Scoring Tool, Identifying and Monitoring of Risky Projects. Well, I will present now Luke, and then I will give you the turn. Well, Luke Molemans was born in Etterbeek, Belgium. After his studies in computer science in Brussels, he worked for about 15 years in IT projects as developer, analyst, and team leader. The last 10 years, he specialized in IT project management. And during his career, he was most of the time active in very large international banks and insurance companies. Well, in January 2013, he joined the European Commission, in particular the DG Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. Well, he joined the European Commission as external consultant to be in charge as IT project manager of the Arachne project. So now, please, Luke, thank you very much for being here again, and you can start the presentation.
Okay, thank you very much. So the introduction was very nice. So I'm here in order to present you what the Arachne scoring tool is all about, because it's a tool which seems to be like the Saleh system. And so we had a presentation a few months ago in Brussels, and it was quite interesting to see what were the common areas of Saleh and Arachne. So my presentation of today will be split into two parts. So first of all, I will explain you a bit what Arachne is all about. I will provide you information on where the data comes from, which data we use from external sources. And the second part will be some screenshots so that you can see how the application works or how we present the results of this risk scoring tool towards our users. So why do we have Arachne? Well, Arachne is a tool that was founded 7-8 years ago because we had this famous article 125.4c in the regulation which said that managing authorities have to put in place anti-fraud measures. So it's very easy to put this in a regulation, and so that they have to do some anti-fraud detection or irregularities detections, but it's easier to help them. So that's why the European Commission decided 7 years ago to build a tool, to make a tool based on experiences that were collected in the past, and to provide the managing authorities in the member states with a tool in order to prevent or to detect fraud or potential fraud. So it's a data mining tool and data enrichment tool with as goal so to provide them a tool in order to identify the most risky projects that they have to manage, and to see which are the contracts which have high risks also, because you have to know so that managing authorities, they have to deal with millions or thousands at least of projects. They cannot follow everything, so they cannot check everything in detail. That's why they need a tool like Arachne, where they can see, okay, these are the most risky projects, these are the ones that we need to check. So the objective is that we support them with this tool. So Arachne is not a methodology, it's not an anti-fraud strategy, not at all, it's just a tool which can help them in order to do all these validations. So, and the benefit is, of course, that by using Arachne, they will have a better defense or better system to prevent and to detect fraud. So we started, as I said, 7-8 years ago with an initial study. 5 years ago, we installed the first version of Arachne. So we installed it in some member states. We received quite a lot of feedback in the last 5 years, let's say. And in May of last year, we installed the version that you will see today, or the slides that you will see today, so which is a system which is not only based on our experiences, technically spoken, of 7-8 years ago, but also with feedback that we received from member states by using Arachne, so by fine-tuning the risks that we calculate in the tool. So today we have about 4,000 users across Europe. We have 20 countries involved. Just to give you some ideas about the magnitude of Arachne. So we have 171 operational programs crossing Europe, about 300,000 projects, 2.5 million invoices. So just to inform you that it's a quite huge system. So, okay. So, and also we have a tool which is available in all languages of the Commission. Now, where is the data coming from, or which databases do we use to identify risks? Well, here you see a very simplified view of the sources. So, but in fact, we have 4 main sources. Most important one for the Arachne risk scoring tool is the member states data. What is the member states data? So here you have a short list of data. So it's the data which is linked to the projects, contracts, and the expenses of the managing authorities. So they have to provide this data to Arachne. We have a specific XML format defined for that, so they have to extract out of their national IT systems information about their projects. What project is it all about? When does it start? When does it end? What is the amount? Who is the beneficiary? Who will receive the money? Who are the project partners? Some basic information on a project. Linked to these projects, we have contracts, so they sign contracts with contractors, and we have to know which one. So who are the contractors, who is dealing with your contracts? You can say, but yeah, why do you need all this information? It's because we want to check whether there is no link between the beneficiary, so the company who receives the money, and the contractors who will perform the money, who will perform the work, so that we are sure that there is no conflict of interest, and so on. So this is why we need this information. On top of this generic information on contracts, we also want to have some information about public procurement, about the number of addendas, key experts, and so on. So all information that managing authorities can send to Arachne. And last but not least, we want to have the expenses. How much did you pay? What were the expenses? When did you pay? When was it invoiced? You can say, okay, but why do we need this? Is because we have specific indicators which checks the relation between what the project cost is and how much is already paid. Are there no double payments? Are the payments done inside the eligibility period, and so on? So information which is very important to provide to Arachne. But what is important to know also is that the managing authority, they can decide what they send to the system. So this is a short list of information fields, but they can decide to send all the information or just a part of the information. But this is the information which comes from the member states, so they are responsible to upload the data in the system. We don't collect the data ourselves. So this is the main source. If we don't have this data, of course, we cannot score. We cannot calculate risks regarding their projects. Once we have received this data, we try to enrich this data with external sources, and we try to calculate risks linked to their data. For that, we use 3 external databases. First one is Orbis database, very important database. It's a database containing data on companies worldwide. So we have a database with more than 290 million companies in the world. We have financial data, so we know what their turnover is, what their benefit is. We know the solvency ratios, so we have specific financial information available. And like I say, for all companies, almost all companies worldwide, 290 million companies. It's not only the active companies, also the inactive, so all companies who went bankrupt in the past, all companies who were merged in the past, this information is still available and very useful for us to detect potential risks. I will explain you later. So next to this financial information, we have information on the shareholdership, on subsidiaries. We know where they are located. We have the people who are in the board of directors. So all information that we will use later on in risk scorings to see whether people are not linked to each other, so whether the people behind the beneficiaries and the contractors are not the same. And also in other cases I will explain later. So in total we have about 146 million people in this database, so where we know in which companies they are involved. So all the data is coming from official sources, so it's what the companies themselves publish in national registers. And Bureau van Dijk, it's a Belgian company, is collecting all this data and is putting this in this very huge database so that we use in the Arachne tool. So this is a very, very important data source, since using this database we can predict financial issues, so we can predict the financial capacity of companies. We have the history of a company regarding their directors, regarding their addresses, regarding their activities. So we can try to identify whether there are no changes in all these behaviors in order to see or to predict whether a company or a project has a high risk of being involved in fraud or not. Very, very important source. A second external source we use is World Compliance. What is World Compliance? World Compliance is a very huge database also, which is owned by LexisNexis, a Dutch company. And in this database we have data about 4 pillars. So we have politically exposed persons, so which means that there we have a list of all political people, all people involved in political functions across the world also. So it's a very huge database. So we don't only have the politicians, but also their close relations, their children, their wives or husbands. So all information is available in this database. Why do we use this one? Well, as you have seen, in Orbis we know who are the people behind companies. With this list of names we can check whether they don't have a political mandate in order to see whether there is no potential corruption involved. So this is why we use this database. Then we have 2 blocks of data, which is sanction list and enforcement list. So let's say that these are the bad guys or the companies who did, let's say, a misbehavior in the past. So all companies who are convicted for fraud, for criminal facts, are listed in this database. So if someone, again, behind the company involved in your project was involved in a fraud case before and he was convicted for a crime, we will know it, and we can inform the users of Arachne that they have to take care because there is a strong involvement of someone in this enforcement or sanction list. And then we have adverse media. So the company LexisNexis has a database where they follow 25,000 newspapers and magazines across the world. And also there, if they see articles popping up with information regarding fraud, regarding criminal behavior, they collect the data, they validate the data, and they put this in the database. So also here we can have additional information if a company involved in projects or a person involved in project is listed somewhere in the press, somewhere in the world, we can inform them about this situation. But it's not, let's say, a scan that they do just on the internet. They really have a dedicated list of newspapers that they follow, and there is a quality assurance control behind this database, so to be sure that we don't take, let's say, fake articles into consideration. So the data is coming from official sources also, so it's lists which were officially published, of course, with exception of the adverse media, where it's coming from the newspapers or these magazines. And then the last remark there is that so the data as such, you cannot retrieve it as such in Arachne. It's only when a company or a person behind the company is involved that we use this data and that we show the results to the user, and this is because of data protection regulation. So this was the second source. So as you can already imagine, so based on the data that we receive, we can check the financial situation, the stability of a company, the behavior of a company, and this we combine then so with the reputation of all these people and companies with the use of World Compliance. A third external source is the VIS database. What is the VIS database? Well, it's a very straightforward database from DG TaxUt in the Commission. It contains the VAT numbers of companies. So what are we doing with that one? Well, we just check whether the VAT numbers that are used by the companies are still active, whether they correspond indeed to the name of the company for which the invoice or the contract was made, and this in order to identify potential VAT fraud. Let's say this is a very straightforward check or database we use just to check whether there is no VAT fraud involved in the projects. So this is what the sources are. So we take this data from the member states, we use the data from these external databases, and we try to identify potential risks. Now the flow works as such. It's also very easy. So data is coming from the member states, so they have to collect their data. They have to upload it into the system. This is done in this in the second phase, so they can just take the data, they upload it in the system, and it comes into our database. Then we have a weekly process which takes all the data and which starts the risk calculation and the enrichment processes that you have seen just before. We push the data back into the servers of the Commission, and the member states can then use the outcome of the Arachne risk scoring tool via the Arachne application itself. So it's a fully automated process which starts every week, every Monday. It takes about 3-4 days to calculate all the risks and to provide the feedback to the member states. And this is maybe a very important message. So it's a non-stop process. So every week again, we check for potential issues in projects and contracts. Why are we doing this? Is because we want to avoid that when projects are setting up in the beginning, they just say, okay, here we have a project of about 1 million euro, we have one contractor, the system starts or the process starts, and then 3 years later, when the project ends, we receive the payments, and then we see or they detect that there was a potential conflict of interest which occurred already 2 years ago or 1 year ago. By recalculating all the risks of every project every week again, we can be very short, we can play very short on the ball, and we can say, okay, here, now you sign a contract with this external subcontractor. Since there is a potential conflict of interest between this subcontractor and the project, you have to take care. So we really want to have a system which is really dynamic and which tells the managing authority as soon as possible about the potential risk that we calculate. And I clearly say potential risk because Arachne is a risk scoring tool, so we try to identify potential risks. It's always the responsibility of the managing authority to verify if the risk that we identify is indeed confirmed. So it's not a system which tells you this is a bad project or a bad beneficiary or a bad contractor. No, it's informing the user that there might be issues in the project in this or that area. Very important. So I explained to you that we do this risk enrichment or this enrichment and risk calculation process. In total, we have 102 risk indicators. So based on the data that we received from the member states, based on the data that we have available coming from external sources, we were able to identify 102 different risk indicators. Now, we split them up in 7 main categories. I don't know if you can read it from there, but we have 7 categories in which we have different or a different number of risk indicators. It goes from 6 indicators that we have in public procurement to 30 indicators we have in the reputation and fraud alert category. Now, how did we come to this 102? As I already said, it's based on experiences and based on data that we have available in the systems of the managing authorities and data that we have available from these external sources. So this is a figure which can change. Now we have 102. It can change in the future if new data or new behavior or risks are popping up. So then we can adapt the tool. But this is the situation today. So in these slides, so I don't have time to explain you all, and it will be too boring. So I will just provide you some examples in every category so that you have a rough idea of what we do in every category. So the first is the public procurement risk category. It's where we try to see whether there were no issues during public procurement. For that, of course, we need information on public procurement. The first example that is there is where we check the lead time between the publication of a tender and the signature of a contract. You can say, okay, why should we have this as a risk? Well, it's because we first want to know how much time it takes to sign a contract between the publication of a tender, and then we want to see whether it doesn't take too much time in comparison what is used to be the case in your program or in their program. So we calculate averages. We say, for instance, for let's say for the region of Valencia, the average is 80 days between the publication of the tender and the signature of the contracts. If now we have a project where it took 120 days, we want to inform the user that maybe there is an incoherence or there is something wrong with this project. So we have specific rules for every single indicator where we try to see whether the behavior is okay and whether it's in line with what is used to be the case in your region or in your country. We check, for instance, the number of valid tenders and the number of received tenders. We check how many tenders you most of the time receive, and also there we try to identify incoherences. And last but not least, so if some company was involved in a financial correction in the past, we also want to inform the people about this, because it's very important that if he was already involved in a financial correction, which means that he already did something wrong in the past, we want to inform the user about this. So these are just three examples. We have 3 others, but yeah, I cannot explain them all now. So then we have some specific contract management indicators where we just check the validity of the VAT number. So something I explained, so we use the V system just to check if it's okay. Then we check the amounts of the contracts with the turnover of the contractors. Very important, because we have seen a lot of times that contractors are signing contracts of a certain amount, but their financial turnover is not enough. So there is a high risk that they can maybe not perform the work. So for that, we use the data that we received from the member states. We go into Orbis to check what the turnover of the company is, and we can validate if this is okay. And the same with the addenda. So we just check whether there are not too much addendas, extras on the contracts after the contract was signed, because I can show you some cases if you want where we see that the contract was signed for 100,000 euros and then later on there were 300 or 400,000 euros of addenda, which is not, let's say, normal. In the eligibility, so we check if the costs which are made are eligible, so whether they were not paid before or after the eligibility period. We check for the double payments, so whether amounts were paid twice, invoices were paid twice, and we also accumulate all the expenses to check whether you don't pay more than what is foreseen in the project. These are just some examples, so just know that in this eligibility category we check everything we can based on the invoices that we receive. The performance is checking whether the projects are performing well. So if you want to train, for instance, 500 people and you already have trained 200, but based on the expenses we see that you have paid already the full amount of the project, we might see some risks for the project, and then we will highlight it also. If they construct a road, we calculate what the average price is of 1 kilometer of highway constructions, for instance, and then we check every project of road construction with this average, just to check whether we don't see projects where you pay maybe twice or 3 times the price of 1 kilometer of construction. I know it's very specific to the funds that we are managing in Europe, but just know that we have in this performance some criteria where we try to see whether the cost that was paid to develop something is in relation to what is used to be the case in a project. In concentration, it's very straightforward. We check the involvement of beneficiaries, contractors, subcontractors, and so on in multiple projects. Not only in the region where they are active, but across Europe. So I informed you that we have 171 operational programs for 20 countries. So if one of your companies is involved here in Spain, it's fine. But if the same company is involved in a contract in Italy, Czech Republic, in France, whatever, we know it also. We accumulate all these amounts and we can inform the member states to say, listen, next time you give a contract to this company, be aware that he is also involved elsewhere, so which might have a risk for the good outcome of the project. Reasonability is a category where we once again check the expenses, just in order to be sure that the money that is spent to the project is well spent. And so we check, for instance, what is used to be the case in publication costs, research costs on a project. If the average for a project here is 3%, we check whether all projects are in line with this 3%. So if you have projects, for instance, where you spend 10, 15% of your research, of your cost to research, then we highlight some risks, because we might think that there is maybe something wrong, maybe you pay too much, and so if too much money is spent to, let's say, side effect costs, then there is maybe less money left for the projects. So this is why we want to inform managing authorities about this. And then the last, and maybe the biggest category and the most important one, is the reputation and fraud. So there we check for propensities of bankruptcies. So in the Orbis database we have specific indicators where we try to identify the companies which have a high risk of bankruptcy in the coming 18 months. So, and this is done for all the companies worldwide. So if enough data is available to calculate this scoring, we do so. So it's a model which is made by Vades Technologies, a Belgian company, and which is used so by Orbis in this, by Bureau van Dijk in this Orbis database. So what we do, we check for every single company involved in your projects whether they have a high risk of bankruptcy, and if it's the case, we inform the managing authorities about this. Then the link between beneficiaries, contractors, in order to identify potential conflict of interest. So we use Orbis database for that, to see whether the people behind the companies are not the same, and just to see that maybe contracts were granted to companies just because of this legal link that there is between two companies via persons, or via subsidiaries, or via shareholderships. Involvement in sanction list and enforcement list is another example. So what we do, we will check all people, all companies behind, and all the companies and all the people behind the companies with this external database of world compliance. And indeed, when we see issues with people who are on this list, we want to inform the managing authorities about this. I will show you an example in one of the coming slides. Involvement in sensitive regions is also very important. So if you have a company and the people behind the companies are also involved in companies in Panama or in the Cayman Islands, whatever, which occurs, then we want to inform them about this. So we want to say, okay, here you have your contractor, maybe it's a Spanish company, but the guy who is the director is also involved in a company in Panama, watch out. That's what we do with this one. So for that, it's very important to have this database of Orbis, where we have these 290 million companies, just to know whether a person or a company is linked to companies in these fiscal paradises, let's say. Very important source. And then the last example which is there is where we try to identify changes of the behavior of the company. So if a company changes their name often, or they address, or there's a high rotation of directors, or they use PO boxes, or they are located on an address which is the same for many companies, then we also want to inform the companies about this, because we have seen in the past already that this behavior often results in fraud, or in a manner to abuse the system, to have the money and then to disappear. Okay, so what we do, so as here you have some examples. So every single indicator that you see here receives a scoring. So it's a scoring which goes between 0 and 20. Some of them have a maximum score of 10, so all depends a bit on the weight that we consider for every single indicator. So we have indicators which we find more important between brackets than others. For instance, the bankruptcy score is very high. If you have a high risk of bankruptcy, you should check past. So, and we have others, so if the address changed, that's a bit less important, so there we have a scoring of maximum 5. So what we try to do for every indicator we see here, we try to give it a scoring. If we have the data available, we score. So you will see later that every single indicator receives a score, and then we take, depending on the number of risks that we have here, the 3, 5, or 10 highest scores to calculate a scoring for the category. And so if you have here 3 times a maximum score of 10, which is the highest score in this category, we will calculate the scoring for the public procurement on an amount of 50. So the scoring of the procurement will be 50, the highest score. If in reputation and fraud you have more than 10 indicators with a high score, you will also have a scoring of 50 on reputation and fraud. So every category for which we have data will receive a score on 50, dependent on the individual indicators which are inside the system. And then at the end, we calculate the average of all these scorings for every project, and this is the final score of the project. In the beginning, I told you that managing authorities, they have hundreds, thousands of projects to follow, so they cannot perform an audit on every single project. So what we say to the managing authorities, if you want to have an investigation on your project, take the most risky ones based on the overall score. These are the projects where we see the most underlying risks. And it's an approach which works fine. We have lots of member states which are indeed selecting the project that they want to audit on the spot based on this general overall score of a project. And indeed, if you go back then to the details of every single indicator, we see that there is a quite of important information which is provided by Arachne. Okay, so this is what we do, where the data comes from, and how we calculate scorings. Now I will show you some examples of screenshots. I think it's 15 slides, just to give you an idea of what the Arachne scoring is, what the Arachne scoring tool is. So it's not a live demo. I scrambled my data also, so sometimes you will not be able to read the names of companies and so on, but it's normal. It's not your eyes which are already tired, but it's normal because of the data protection. I guess you all know, so we have to watch out what we do. I just didn't scramble the data from Orbis, because the data from Orbis is just data that you can retrieve somewhere on the web, or that you can retrieve yourself. So this one I didn't scramble. So this is an example of a dashboard, because I told you so that we calculate projects scores. The results are presented to the users via dashboards. This is an example of a project dashboard. In total, we have 4 different dashboards. We have a dashboard on projects, one on beneficiaries, one on contracts, and one on contractors. It's 4 times the same look and feel, but this is how we present the results. So users will see the list of their projects for which they are responsible. We have some general information of the ID and a case management, but I will not explain. And then here, this column, I don't know if you can read it, but this column is the column where the final score of the project is listed. So these here are the most risky projects for the user who has this profile. So it's a scoring with a maximum value of 50. 32 on 50, it's still okay, but it's already quite high. So this 32 is the average of the 7 categories that we have there. So the 7 categories that I explained, public procurement, contract management, eligibility, are listed here. So here you can see the scorings of these 7 categories. You can see that in some cases we have gray bullets. This means that there was no data available. So if managing authority doesn't provide invoices, the eligibility scorings will not be calculated. So we leave it empty. So it will be grayed out. If we don't see any risks, then the scoring will be 0, and you will have a green bullet. If we have medium risk, the color will be yellow, and if we see a high risk, then the color will be red. So what does it mean? That if you have to look at all these projects, everywhere where you see a red dot means there is some things to check. Now, how can people know the details? Well, inside the tool, they can open the columns or the indicators which are behind the category. This is an example of the reputation and fraud category. So where if you open this one here, you will see here the list of all these 30 indicators with the scoring of every single indicator. So as you can see here, there are a lot of red dots. So it means that the user who has this profile, he has a lot of work to do. He has to validate quite a lot of information. So for every single indicator, and you cannot read it, but the first column is where we check the VAT number. The second one is where we check the bankruptcy score and so on. So he can take the system and he can click in a cell to retrieve more detailed information. I will explain you with 4 or 5 slides what kind of information we provide to the managing authorities. So this is an example for the contract management where we check, for instance, the VAT number. So if you see here that we had a value of 10 for a project, so if they click in this cell, they will receive a pop-up window where the system tells, first of all, so this project has 33 contracts. 12 of them generated a risk on VAT number. So for that we use the VIS database. Here you can see the contractors which are involved. Here you can see the VAT number which is uploaded to the system. Here, sorry, this one. And then we say, okay, here, all these numbers, they are not correct. The structure, the format of the VAT number is not okay. So this is already a risk. It's not normal. The second one here, the format is okay. The number is in VIS, so it's okay. But the name doesn't correspond with the name of your contractor. So you said that this was the company, but in VIS we find this name. So it might be that here we have a misuse of VAT number. Might be. We don't say that it's by default, so, but this has to be checked. And then we have others where the number is not in VIS at all, and others where everything is fine. So the last column here shows you which is the scoring of every single contractor. And the project receives the highest score of all the contracts that we have here. Okay, so this is just one example on how we validate this data and how we perform or how we show the data to the managing authorities. Another one is this one where we check the turnover of a company with the amount of the contract. So what you see here is that we have 10 contracts in this project where we see potential risks. So first of all, you have here the list of the contracts. The name of the contract is hidden, but where you see the start date and the end date of the project, the duration that we calculate, and sometimes you can see that it's a minus, so it means that the project ended before it started. This is quite weird, but this is how the data is entered in their system. So, or it's a data, I'm pretty sure that here it's a data entry problem, but still, this is the data that we receive from the member states, so we have to use this. So then we see the amount of the contract, and then we normalize this amount, so we recalculate the amount of the contract on a yearly basis. So if you have a contract, for instance, like here, which takes 29 months, we normalize this over a period of a year in order to be able to compare this with the turnover of a company which is also on a yearly basis. So, and if we see then differences, like for instance here, where you have a company who has a turnover of 136,000 euros, and the amount of the contract is 136, we consider this as a risk, because it's not normal that the company has to take the full amount of the turnover of a contract for a contract which only goes over 3 months. So we are quite sure that they will not be able to perform this work into the 3 months. Yeah. So and this we do for all contracts linked to a contractor. Another example in reputation and fraud is where we check potential conflict of interest. So where we check the beneficiaries and the contractors at both sides. So here I have taken an example out of the system. I scrambled it, where you can see here the project, where you can see with the blue dot that this is the beneficiary, and we have in this project 2 contractors where we see a potential conflict of interest. Is because there is a link between this contractor and this beneficiary, which goes via Richard here, who is in the board of director of your contractor, who is also in the board of director of this company, which is owned for 51% by your beneficiary. So this is data that we could retrieve out of Orbis, and which could be international. So this here is a simple example, but it can be that this company is, like for instance here in Spain, the beneficiary is also in Spain, but here we have a company somewhere in France. This is possible because we have, as I said, a cross-world database available to check all these relations. So if people are setting up constructions in these sensitive regions with all these kind of links, we are able to detect this in the tool. And the second conflict of interest goes via this link here, but which is in fact the same reasoning as the first one. So it's very important also to inform you so that we have this very huge database of Orbis with 290 million companies. If you have to check this yourself, or if someone has to check this manually, it will take a lot of time. It's very time consuming. So, and we are checking this every week. So we check every week if we don't see any links between people, between companies, shareholdership, all information that we have in this huge Orbis database. I told you that we have that we check the involvement of people and companies in enforcement lists. So here I made a print screen where we have some involvements. So where we say, okay, these companies or these management members, they are appearing somewhere on the enforcement lists. We give them a scoring based on the quality of matching. And so if we have a good matching on the name and the birth date or the address, we have a higher score than another one. So which means that if we have only a matching of the names, we reduce our score with 50% because then we are less sure that we are dealing with the correct people. So it's very important to know that the quality of matching decides on the final score of this indicator. Once we have identified who is involved in an enforcement list, we provide here at the bottom of the screen the information. So here you see the company who was contractor who is on the list, and by clicking here on these links, we provide extra information on why they are on the list. I just explained or showed 3 examples of what you can expect from Orbis. So first is a guy who is convicted for market manipulation in October 2012. We have someone who was also involved in fraud here, and another one who was indicted for organized crime, bank fraud and embezzlement. So this is the kind of information that we show member states. So there we say why they are on the list, or why the company is on the list. The next box is a summary of why he is convicted, where the data comes from. And then last but not least, we provide them with some links to the internet where they can find more information about this case. But let's say, so this is very sensitive information. So this is information of people, companies who are convicted for involvement in fraud or in criminal behavior. So it's very important that we provide this data only to the people who are involved with the management of our funds in Europe. Okay, so this just to give you some ideas about how we present the results, the details about the risk indicators. We also have screens which looks like this. It's where someone behind his desk can see in Arachne, listen, I want to know what has changed this week during the risk calculation process. Or I want to know what has changed since last month because I was on holiday, what has changed, or I didn't check Arachne for X months, I want to know what has been changed since the 1st of July. So they can have some options here where they can see the list of the projects which have been changed significantly. So we present here the list of the projects where there was an increase or a decrease of the highest increase or decrease, where they can see the old value, the new value, and so on. So and by clicking here, then they can go to the details and they can see what was the situation. So this is a screen which is very often used because we don't want people to sit every day behind their desk to check Arachne. But if they have time or if they need to make a payment, they can easily see what has changed since the last run. This is a risk evolution graph. It's not the nicest graph, we know, but it gives the user the possibility to check here all the dates at which we calculated risks for this project and where he can see which risk has changed when. So here you see that on the 19th of January, on the 9th of February, suddenly the risk went up for the reputation and fraud category. For the concentration, sorry, my eyes are not so good anymore. And that here we have a high risk which popped up for the reputation and fraud. We also have inside Arachne the possibility to retrieve the data from that day. So we have options which looks like this, where you can see the situation on the 27th of April, for instance, and you can compare it with the situation of the 25th, where you can see the values that we have here and the values that we had at that time. So this gives the users the possibility to show at any moment that when they checked, there were no risks or the risks were low, whatever, and by clicking in the cell, they can always retrieve all the data that was used to calculate this risk. So this is a very important feature, so that during the whole life cycle of projects, we keep track of all the information available for the end users. And this is, I don't know if it will be the case here, but in the member states, when auditors of the Commission are popping up in the programs to check the situation on a project, well, with this they can prove that there were no risks when they checked and so on. So it's very important to have this feature in the tool. So this was about dashboards, about risk scorings. I informed you that we have this database of 290 million companies. These data can be retrieved also via our tool. So you can just key in the name of a company and the system will give you a result. Here in this case I took Omega Pharma, where you can see all the companies in the world having these two words in their name. And we have specific filter options where you can really retrieve the data from one single company. What do we provide as information of a company? So here we have general information about the company as it is today. So their address, their NACE code, the age, the size of the company, and so on. And we have the financial data of the last 3 years published by the company. So here we see the turnover, the profit margin, the solvency ratios, some indicators that we use in the risk scorings of Arachne. So this is what the companies have published, and this is what we use in order to calculate risks on the financial part of the project. We have here at the bottom of the screen these Vpi indicators. Vpi stands for Vadis Performance Indicators. So where you can see that this company has a risk of 9 on a scale of 20 to become bankrupt in the coming 18 months, which is very, very low. So, and this you can retrieve for any company in the world. We also have the list of the shareholders. So we know that these are the two companies who owns Omega Pharma, one for 90%. This one we don't know how much the direct participation is. So once again, this data comes from Orbis. It's what has been published by the companies. Okay, okay. Okay, so, and then we have subsidiaries, so the list of the companies in which they have shares with the participation that they have. We also have the directors. Here you see the list of all the directors of this company. You can see the birthdays of these people, the functions, and they can have multiple functions. And last but not least, the indication whether they are still in the company or whether they were previously in the company. It's very important, as I said to you in the beginning, that we have this historization of all these companies. So if people are moving from companies, by this information, we can check, for instance, if someone or people involved in your company were not involved in bankruptcies in the past. So this can be retrieved out of this. We have nice views, which is this one, is where we present the group structure of companies, where you can see where they are located, the participation rate that they have, so where you can immediately see that this company of the United Kingdom is owned by a company in Switzerland, and so on and so on. So it's very straightforward to retrieve. We have also more in-depth views where you can retrieve data of a company with all the shareholders that they have. We have schemes which looks like this, which is the affinity view, where you can select the name of a guy, this one here, where you can see the full web, all the links that he has with other people, with other companies. So it's this information which is our source to detect potential conflict of interest. So if this guy is involved in your project and this company here is one of your contractors, we are able to determine this via these constructions. This is a surrounding graph view, is where you can put a person on top of the screen where you can see his involvement in Arachne, so in which project is he involved, which are the contractors, which are the links that there are between all these people, so that you can, let's say, in one view, see what is the impact of this person in projects in Europe. Last slide. So we have a web page, but I will send you the slides and maybe you can afterwards publish it. So we have a web page which is available also in Spanish, where you can read more about Arachne, what we do, why we do it, what the legal basis, what our commitments are towards the member states, what their obligations are towards the Commission. So everything is explained on this page.
Much for your presentation, Luke. I think it's very interesting. I have some idea what was Arachne, but thank you very much. But now I have to say wow, because really. Well, now it's time for question. We have maybe time for one or two questions from anyone. Want to ask a question, please? Okay. You have to speak with the microphone because it is being recorded. Well, he was first.
Hi, thanks a lot for the presentation, really great content. My question is, who's actually using this project? Is it only meant for EU projects, or can any government body use it? For example, in Spain, one very small local government. Can they use it, for example?
No, unfortunately, not today. So today it's really meant only for the managing authorities or the ministries who are managing EU funds. Yeah, and it's maybe very clear because the tool as such is free. It's the users don't have to pay for it. It's all paid by the Commission. And so today we restrict the use of Arachne to people who are involved in the management of EU funds. But it doesn't exclude that in the future we could extend the scope if we really do let's say a restriction between the accesses, so that members who are using nationally the data cannot see the data from other member states and so on, because it's quite sensitive information that we have in there. So it might be that in the future we will expand the scope, but today it's only for managing authorities involved in European projects. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you for your nice talk. My question is, well, at the very beginning of your talk, you said something that this is a data enrichment and data mining tool. So my question is whether you're using any kind of descriptive or predictive model to calculate any kind of risk score? Well,
we only have two predictive models that we use, and and we didn't create these models because I must be honest on that. So we work with a company in Belgium which is Vadis Technologies. So, and they have calculated models for the prediction of bankruptcy and also the prediction of a company to be sold in the coming 18 months. Yeah. And unfortunately, I can give you some ideas about what they do, but they don't provide us the details because it's their intellectual property, as you can imagine. So, but these are the two only predictive models that we use today in Arachne.
More questions? Well, I have a small question related to the compute, how you compute the scoring. You say that it is after you compute the different score for different indicators. You said, well, then you use the average. But is this the weighted average or is a normal average? Because maybe some indicators for a specific case could be more important or more relevant than the others.
No, for us, we give us a different scoring to an indicator as such, but averages are always calculated as such, so it's just the average. Because we give a different weight to indicators, but it doesn't mean that they are less important. It's just if we try to focus or we try to inform member states which are the most risky ones, we want them to have the projects where the most tricky areas are highlighted. For instance, if you have a project where we see a high risk of bankruptcy or a high potential conflict of interest, this seems to be more important than someone who has changed his address twice the last 2 years. And so we want that these two first are popping up first before the other is popping up. But for averages, we just take all the projects inside the program, we calculate the average straightforward, and this is what we use. Because we just want to see what is used to be the case in a program, and then we compare every single project with what is used to be the case in this program.
Well, thank you again. Oh, one question more. Very fast, and also the answer very fast because now we are out of time. Okay, time is over.
Thank you very much. One question regarding the news articles. How do you assess if a news article is like fake or not? Because you told that you won't include fake information.
I have to be very quick. So LexisNexis is the company who is the owner of this database. So they have a complete quality assurance procedure in place. So they scan these 25,000 newspapers and magazines. So they have already a dedicated list of websites that they scan. And if they have a matching, then they manually take the article, and people are reading the article and they are putting indexes. They check if it's indeed a negative article or a positive. Because I can mention to be here today to talk about fraud, but if this is tomorrow in the press, I will not be linked to this. But if I was involved in fraud, then I will be linked. So there's first of all a selection, and then there is a committee who meets every week to check the new articles and to see whether we can put it in the database or not. Which means that all the articles that we have in there, they are, let's say, quality proofed. And I must say, so we are running now since 5 years with Arachne, and we never received any feedback that the information that we send there is not correct. So it's fake news we don't have today.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Now I think it's time to close. Thank you very much again.